It was supposed to be just another evening out. Darius Carter, a successful entrepreneur, had been in town for a business meeting and decided to treat himself to dinner at a well-known restaurant. It wasn't an extravagant place, but it had a reputation for good food and a comfortable atmosphere. Dressed in a crisp suit, he walked in with confidence, expecting nothing more than a good meal after a long day. But the moment he stepped through the doors, he noticed something was off. Conversations among the diners seemed to hush slightly. A few pairs of eyes lingered on him longer than they should have. The hostess, a woman in her late 40s with stiff blonde hair, hesitated before acknowledging him. When she finally did, her smile was tight, forced. "Good evening, sir. How can I help you?" she asked, her tone professional but lacking warmth. "A table for one, please," Darius replied. She glanced around, even though the restaurant wasn't full. There were at least 5 empty tables in clear view. "I'm sorry, but we're actually fully booked for the night," she said, her voice carefully measured. Darius frowned. He had checked their online reservations just before coming in. Walk-ins were welcome, and there was no mention of a full house. "That's odd," he said, glancing over her shoulder. "I see a few open tables." Her lips pressed together. "Those are reserved." Something in her tone told him everything he needed to know. Darius had been through this before. It was subtle, always just enough to leave room for doubt, but he knew what was happening. "Right," he said, his voice calm. "In that case, I'll wait." "How long is the wait time?" The hostess hesitated again. "Unfortunately, we won't be able to accommodate you tonight." Darius held her gaze. "Why not?" She shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking to a man standing a few feet away, the restaurant manager. A tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair. He had been watching the interaction closely. When their eyes met, he stepped forward. "Is there a problem here?" the manager asked, his tone firm, almost challenging. Darius exhaled slowly, choosing his next words carefully. "I was just asking for a table, but I'm being told you're fully booked despite open seats. I'd like to understand why." The manager didn't even try to disguise his disinterest. "We reserve the right to refuse service, sir." And there it was, the unspoken rule that had been used against people like him for generations. Darius felt a familiar heat rise in his chest. Not just anger, but frustration, exhaustion. He could have pushed further, called them out, made a scene. But he knew how these situations played out. The moment a black man raised his voice, he became the problem. Instead, he nodded slowly, taking in the restaurant's name one last time. "I see," he said, keeping his voice level. "Well, I'll remember that." With that, he turned and walked out, feeling the weight of their stares on his back. Outside, the cool night air did little to calm the storm inside him. He had worked hard to get where he was, built his businesses from the ground up, fought for respect in rooms where he wasn't always welcome. And yet, here he was, still being reminded that in some places, people like him weren't wanted. He could have left it at that, could have shaken his head, brushed it off, and found another place to eat. But something about this moment felt different. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Hey, Marcus, I need you to do some digging for me. Find out everything you can about a place called Vincent's Steakhouse." He wasn't sure where this would lead, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let this slide. Darius had dealt with racism before, but something about this particular incident made it stick. Maybe it was the arrogance in the manager's eyes, the way he dismissed him so casually, so confidently, knowing there would be no consequences. Or maybe it was because Darius had reached a point in his life where he no longer tolerated being silently excluded. By the time he got back to his hotel room, his mind was already working. If there was one thing he knew how to do, it was taking control of situations others thought he had no power in. An hour later, Marcus called back. "You were right to be suspicious. Vincent's Steakhouse isn't just another local restaurant. It's been around for over 30 years, family-owned, and it has a long history of, let's just say, selective service." Darius leaned forward. "Meaning what?" "Meaning they have a reputation. You won't find complaints on Yelp or Google because they're careful, but if you ask around, black folks in the area know better than to try dining there. They don't outright ban anyone, but they always seem to be full when certain customers walk in. It's an old-school discrimination tactic. Nothing obvious enough to get them sued, but enough that people get the message. Darius clenched his jaw. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made his blood boil. Marcus continued. The owner, Gerald Vincent, is in his 60s now. He took over from his father, who opened the place back in the 80s. From what I gathered, they're struggling financially. COVID hit them hard, and they never fully bounced back. They've been trying to keep up appearances, but their numbers aren't great. Darius smirked. Now, that's interesting. Marcus chuckled. I thought you'd like that. Their debts are piling up. They took out a loan last year, but their revenue hasn't improved. If someone were to make the right offer, they might not have a choice but to sell. Darius leaned back, staring at the ceiling. How much are we talking? Based on their financials, they're worth around $1.5 million, but with their debt situation, you could probably take them for a lot less. Maybe even under $1 million if you negotiate right. Darius ran a hand over his chin. He had the money. $1 million wasn't pocket change, but it was an investment he could afford. More importantly, this wasn't just about money. This was about principle. Make some calls, Darius said. Find out if Vincent is open to selling. But keep my name out of it. Marcus whistled. You're serious about this? Oh, I'm dead serious. Over the next few weeks, Marcus worked his contacts, subtly poking around to see if Gerald Vincent was willing to sell. It didn't take long to confirm the rumors. He was indeed struggling, though he wasn't openly admitting it. His pride wouldn't let him, but behind closed doors, he was looking for a way out. Darius played the long game, watching and waiting. He wanted to make sure Vincent had no choice but to sell. He wanted to walk into that same restaurant, this time not as a customer, but as the owner. But before that could happen, he needed leverage. Through Marcus research, they found out that Vincent had a few unpaid vendors threatening to take legal action. His bank had denied him a refinancing loan, and his liquor license was up for renewal soon, something he couldn't afford if his debts weren't settled. Darius smiled when he read through the reports. The pieces were lining up perfectly. The next move was simple. Through a third-party investor, Darius made an anonymous offer to buy Vincent Steakhouse. The initial response? A firm no. Gerald Vincent wasn't ready to let go just yet. But as the weeks passed, things got worse for Vincent. More debt collectors knocking at his door. More vendors refusing to supply him on credit. His staff starting to notice missed paychecks. The second offer came in, this time lower than before. Again, Vincent refused. But then, as if fate itself was intervening, a scandal hit. A former employee, a black waitress who had quit months ago, came forward with claims of racial discrimination behind the scenes. She shared stories of how black customers were often denied service through subtle tactics, how she had been told to suggest takeout whenever a certain type of customer walked in. The story picked up traction on social media. The restaurant's name started circulating for all the wrong reasons. Protesters showed up outside, demanding accountability. Suddenly, Vincent Steakhouse wasn't just a struggling business. It was a PR nightmare. And that's when Darius made his final move. A third offer, this time even lower. And this time, Gerald Vincent had no choice but to consider it. Gerald Vincent was a stubborn man. He had spent his entire life running Vincent Steakhouse, upholding what he believed to be tradition. He wasn't the type to back down easily, but reality was closing in on him from all sides. His restaurant was bleeding money. Vendors were pulling out, customers were canceling reservations, and the protest outside had grown larger with each passing day. What had once been a local institution was now a symbol of discrimination, and the bad press was relentless. For weeks, Gerald had rejected the idea of selling. He still believed he could turn things around. But as the days dragged on, even he had to admit the truth. He was losing control. And then came the third offer. It was lower than the previous ones, almost insultingly low. But for the first time, Gerald didn't immediately reject it. He sat in his office, staring at the contract. His lawyer had advised him to take it. His accountant had practically begged him to take it. But his pride? His pride told him to hold on just a little longer. Until he got a call. Gerald, we need to talk, his bank representative said. Vincent exhaled sharply. What now? We reviewed your financials again. Given the state of your business and the recent media coverage, we can't approve your loan extension. A cold wave washed over him. You already said it was under review, and now it's been denied. Gerald gripped the phone, his knuckles turning white. "You can't just cut me off like this. I've been banking with you for years." "I'm sorry, Mr. Vincent, but as of next month, your payments will be due in full. If you can't meet them, we'll have to move forward with repossession." The line went dead. Gerald Vincent sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had no more moves left. With shaking hands, he reached for the contract. Meanwhile, Darius was watching everything unfold from a distance. He had played his cards perfectly, waiting for the moment when Vincent had no choice but to accept his offer. The final negotiation was brief. Gerald tried to push for a higher price, but he had no leverage left. In the end, he signed the contract, handing over full ownership of Vincent Steakhouse. And just like that, the restaurant he had once been so proud of, the one he had refused to serve Darius in, was no longer his. Darius Carter was now the new owner. Darius Carter sat in the very restaurant that had once refused to serve him. Only this time, he wasn't just another customer being turned away. He was the owner. The paperwork had been finalized, the keys handed over, and the former staff was gathered in the dining area, waiting to hear what would happen next. Some of them looked nervous, others uncertain. They had seen the protests, heard the accusations against their former boss. And now, they had a black man standing in front of them, the same type of person their previous employer had gone to great lengths to exclude. Darius let the silence hang for a moment before he finally spoke. "Let's get one thing straight," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This place will not operate the way it used to. If you have a problem serving anyone based on the color of their skin, their background, or where they come from, you can leave right now." He let his words settle, scanning the room. A few people shifted in their seats. If you're willing to work in a place that values respect, fairness, and good service for every customer, then you have nothing to worry about. But if you think you're going to keep up with the same old ways, I promise you, you won't last here. One of the waiters, a young woman who had been at the restaurant for a couple of years, raised her hand. "Does that mean we're all keeping our jobs?" Darius nodded. "For now, yes. But I won't lie to you. Things are going to change. And some of you might not like those changes." Another employee, an older man who had been a manager under Gerald Vincent, cleared his throat. "What kind of changes?" Darius folded his arms. "For starters, this restaurant is getting a complete rebrand. New name, new menu, new atmosphere. Vincent Steakhouse is done." A few murmurs passed through the room. Darius continued. "This place will be rebuilt as a symbol of inclusion, not exclusion. It's going to be a place where everyone is welcome, not just the people some of you are used to serving. That means new policies, new training, and new expectations. If that's a problem for you, say so now." Silence. Then, slowly, one of the younger waiters nodded. "Honestly, I think it's about time." A few others nodded in agreement. Darius let a small smile form. "Good, because we're just getting started." Over the next few months, the transformation was in full swing. The old signage was torn down. The outdated decor was replaced with modern, inviting designs. The restaurant was given a new name, Carter's Table, a name that meant something, a name that signified ownership, change, and progress. The menu was revamped, blending classic steakhouse dishes with new flavors that reflected diversity. Instead of the rigid, old-fashioned dining experience, Carter's Table became a place where anyone, no matter their race, background, or status, could walk in and feel welcome. But Darius knew a rebrand alone wasn't enough. The restaurant's reputation needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. So he launched a campaign. He invited food bloggers, journalists, and influencers to experience the new Carter's Table firsthand. He partnered with local Black-owned farms and businesses to source ingredients, making sure every dollar spent contributed to a larger movement of economic empowerment. And most importantly, he reached out to the very community that had once been pushed away from Vincent Steakhouse. The first grand reopening night was packed. Customers of all backgrounds filled the restaurant, enjoying meals in a space that had once been off-limits to them. And Darius? He sat at a table in the corner, watching as his vision came to life. The restaurant that had once turned him away was now his. And for the first time, it belonged to everyone. Months after the grand reopening, Carter's Table was thriving. What was once a failing business on the verge of collapse had become one of the most talked about restaurants in the city. The change wasn't just about food, it was about legacy. Darius had done more than buy a restaurant. He had rewritten its story. The very place that once excluded him was now a symbol of inclusivity, progress, and resilience. And the impact of that transformation rippled far beyond the walls of Carter's Table. Word spread quickly. People who had never stepped foot inside Vincent's Steakhouse because they knew they weren't welcome now came in groups, eager to experience what Carter's Table had to offer. Black families, Latino families, Asian families, and white families who believed in change all dined under the same roof, something that had once seemed impossible in this space. Even former protesters who had once stood outside the building holding signs now sat at tables inside, enjoying their meals in a place that had once been a battleground for racial exclusion. One evening, an older black couple walked up to Darius as he was checking on customers. "Young man," the woman said, placing a hand on his arm, "we've lived in this town for over 40 years. We remember when Vincent's opened. We remember how they treated folks like us. We never thought we'd see the day where this place would change. But you made it happen, and we just wanted to say thank you." Darius felt a lump in his throat. He had known what this restaurant meant to people, but hearing it firsthand made it real in a way he hadn't fully grasped before. "This isn't just about me," he said, shaking the man's hand. "This is about all of us, and I'm just glad to be part of that change." The success of Carter's Table wasn't just a feel-good story. It was a business success. Sales had more than doubled in the first 6 months, and investors started taking notice. Other struggling restaurants, especially those with outdated business models and bad reputations, reached out for advice. Darius saw an opportunity. He launched a mentorship program, the Carter Initiative, aimed at helping Black entrepreneurs break into the restaurant industry. Through workshops, funding opportunities, and networking events, he created a pipeline for future restaurant owners who might have otherwise been shut out of the industry. And then, something unexpected happened. Gerald Vincent, his former adversary, the man who had once refused him service, requested a meeting. Darius was surprised, but he agreed. They met at Carter's Table, the very place Gerald had once ruled over. Gerald looked different. The arrogance was gone. He seemed smaller, like a man who had been forced to reckon with the consequences of his choices. "I won't waste your time," Gerald said, his voice heavy. "I've been watching what you've done here. It's impressive." Darius leaned back, arms crossed. "That's so." Gerald sighed. "Look, I was wrong. About a lot of things. I ran this place the way my father did, and he ran it the way his father did. But I never stopped to ask if any of it was right. I just thought that's how things were supposed to be." Darius studied him for a long moment. He had spent months resenting this man, imagining what he would say if he ever got the chance. But now that he was here, facing the man who had once humiliated him, he felt something unexpected. Pity. Gerald Vincent was a relic of the past, a man who had been left behind by progress. "I'm not looking for forgiveness," Gerald continued. "I just wanted you to know. I see it now, and I hope you keep doing what you're doing, because it's working." Darius nodded slowly. "I appreciate you saying that." And with that, Gerald stood up, gave him one last nod, and walked away. A year later, Carter's Table was stronger than ever. The restaurant had expanded, opening a second location in a neighboring city. The Carter Initiative had helped launch 3 Black-owned restaurants in the area, all of them thriving. But for Darius, the real success wasn't in the numbers, it was in the people. It was in the families who came in, knowing they were welcome. It was in the employees who had once feared change, but now embraced it. It was in the young Black entrepreneurs who walked into his mentorship meetings, eyes full of dreams, knowing they had a chance. One night, as he locked up Carter's Table after another successful day, he stood outside and looked at the sign above the door. Carter's Table, his name, his legacy, and proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't just proving people wrong. It's changing the world around you for the better.